Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary and Admiral, again, to add to my colleagues, thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for your past service. Thank you for this service. And I also want to extend my condolences to the families of the Fort Hood soldiers who were killed. We're keeping them in our thoughts and our prayers. I want to, first of all, just state that I think we all agree, and your report certainly says that this was a failure on the front end. We commend the first responders for their fantastic work, but this was a failure. And I'd like to, I don't want to belabor that because I think it's been talked about, Mr. Chairman, but there's a Houston Chronicle article of yesterday, Richard Lardner and Calvin Woodward, that I'd ask be submitted for the record, which I think details a lot of the failures in monitoring Major Hassan along the way, and that something should have been done to prevent this.
It'll be made part of the record.
Thank you, sir. What I want to talk about is three things, and they're questions for you. And the first one is to follow up on what Senator Thune was talking about concerning soldiers on the base carrying weapons. And this struck me as well because I recently, this past week, went to 4 military bases in Florida, from Naval Air Station in Pensacola to Tyndall to Eglin to Hurlburt Air Force. And the thing that you notice, indifferent than going to a military base in a theater of war, like going to Bagram Air Force Base, is that the soldiers aren't, and the airmen and the sailors aren't carrying weapons. But when you're at Bagram, you see half of the servicemen and women carrying their weapons. And I don't think that this would have happened, potentially, at Bagram Air Force Base for 2 reasons. One is there would have been a huge deterrent to Major Hassan if he knew that the other soldiers were carrying weapons. And the second thing is, if it would have happened, to follow up on Senator Thune's point, that 4 minutes of time or whatever the period was where there was no first responder there, one of our service members, I am sure, would have picked up their weapon and fired back. And I hope that you will, in your continuing work, stress this to the Secretary of Defense. Because while I understand the Admiral's point about order on the base, there is probably a sweet spot here where some of the folks on a base, even in the United States of America, should be carrying weapons. Maybe where there's going to be large groups gathered, I guess, like in where this processing center was happening. So I don't know if you have any further comments on that. You've already answered Senator Thune's question, but I wanted to make that point. Mr. Secretary.
I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
And that is this. It has happened overseas where people have been carrying weapons. We've had incidents in which a soldier has gone berserk and started shooting, and there were weapons around him. It didn't stop him. Secondly, let's assume that everyone's able to carry weapons, say, at Fort Hood. Well, then, for a committed person, it wouldn't have been necessary to smuggle them in to use them. And then thirdly, I guess, well, no. I think firstly and secondly is enough. If the Admiral wants to add a thirdly, I'll let him.
I don't argue with your fundamental point. I would just say that as the commander, I realized that I was responsible for the creation of the environment. And so the environment, deployed environment is always different than the environment at home. And so I think there are a lot of things that I could figure out how to do before I decided to arm every single human being on the base. I don't discount at all your point about the degree of difficulty for a shooter. But I believe Secretary West has accurately responded. We have cases, to be sure, and we have been very careful not to define specific single point dot solutions for these cases because, for starters, remember, we did this in an extraordinarily short period of time. If we were going to then look at all the possible courses of alternatives, solutions for every one of the recommendations we made, we would have needed at least 6 months and not the short time.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that there's a general point, and I use the term sweet spot for a reason, not that you would put a gun on every serviceman or woman's side, but that there be some thought about this point, because I do think that knowing that someone is bearing arms is a deterrent. And maybe it hasn't always been a deterrent, but it can be a deterrent. And it certainly might have saved 13 people. We don't know, but it might have saved some of them. The second thing is in terms of, and I want, Senator Collins is going to speak in a minute, and her Homeland Security Committee, along with Senator Lieberman, has talked about the need for training for all service members and identifying signs of Islamic extremism. I wonder if we don't only need to encourage our service members to look for these signs and report them, but that we need to do more than that and require it. And I think about something that universities do. I didn't attend the University of Virginia, but I understand they have a very stringent honor code. And the honor code can be broken in two ways, one by violating it, and the second is failing to report that someone else violated it. And I wonder, for your consideration, is whether or not we should make a suggestion like that, that you have an obligation as a member of the United States military that if you see something that is out of line, to report it. And there, if I feel like in my service record, I'm going to be reprimanded for not reporting something, none of us like to tell on our colleagues. It's human nature. But I also commend that to you. I don't know if it's something you consider, and if you want to comment on that, I'd appreciate that as well.
I think this is the kind of questions and all of the pursuit of potential solutions that the Secretary would think is going on without suggesting one is the right solution or not. Phase 2 is to do the drill down. And they couldn't do the drill down in the whole breadth of things that we looked at, 30+ thousand pages of directions and policies and all of that. Our job was to put the spotlight on the key things that they could go do in a hurry. And it's my understanding that's his expectation for Phase 2.
The third and final point I have is we've heard this phrase, connect the dots, and I heard it yesterday when we had a Commerce Committee hearing with Secretary Napolitano and Director Leitner about the Christmas Day bombing attempt. And that's obviously the great struggle, is connecting the dots. And you mentioned, Admiral, having perhaps some other special unit or division of people who would try to do that. And that seems to be smart to me, that you have someone who's going to look through all of the information, not be tasked with maybe other jobs, but be tasked with trying to, I don't know if it's an internal affairs function or if it's just a function to make sure that someone is out there looking at these reports that are filled out on different servicemen. I know there's a lot of people in the United States military, but we have really good technology in this country, technology that's being used by the private sector. I don't know if these reports are scanned. I don't know if they're entered on a computer. I don't know if someone can use cloud computing and some of these new techniques to do searches. We failed, again, on the almost terrible tragedy on Christmas Day because of a misspelling of a name and other things that failed in our intelligence and the way that we process, gather, and evaluate intelligence. And one thing I just might commend to you in your further discussions with the Secretary is, if you do establish one of these units, is talking to the people in the private sector who have developed this wonderful technology and see if it might be an aid for helping keep our servicemen and women safe.
May I comment? So we say in the report that we've been having arguments about who owns what pieces of information. We've been having those discussions long enough. It's time to move on. And so, without defining what that solution is, I don't know how a commander can possibly connect the dots if he doesn't have all the dots in his doc kit, or dot kit is maybe the right term. But also, I bring attention to this point. We told the Secretary this isn't just interagency. This is inside the department as well. Challenge the assumptions on who has all of the pieces of information. The commanders will be better equipped, and we know how brilliant they are when they're given the tools.
Actually, I think the organization that you may be thinking about that we recommended was one that's designed to collect all the indicators, keep them cataloged, update them regularly, and make them available to commanders and those who have to make decisions. Your idea has, I think, to do with connecting dots on specific individuals where those things come up, and that's an interesting concept, and it's not one that we necessarily focused on. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator LeMieux. Senator Lieberman.